All right, good evening, everybody. Peter Marzano here with another episode of Pick and Pop, actually, my first one in a while. And we're going to talk about the NBA draft, which happened last night. There were certainly some interesting moves, some draft night trades that did occur, but nothing major. And this is, of course, kind of following up my video where I talked about the potential of Kawhi Leonard moving. And early on yesterday, there was a story that the Spurs basically told the Lakers to shove it, that there would not be a deal made for Kawhi Leonard, at least in advance of the draft. And that was something I talked about earlier about the Lakers really having a great arsenal to try and bring Kawhi Leonard in. Of course, he is a free agent in 2019. So if the Lakers truly are interested in Kawhi, and the interest there seems to be quite mutual, as a big story was that Kawhi wanted out, and that would be his biggest his preferred destination, I should say. Free agency may be the best path to try and take in that regard. So that's certainly something to look at within the next year or so, and certainly within the week and a half leading up to free agency. But as far as everything that went on last night, the first couple of picks went as expected. I'm once again going to pull it up just so I don't misspeak on anything and I'm giving accurate information. But as expected, DeAndre Ayton was selected by the Phoenix Suns for a first overall pick, and I certainly consider them to be a winner of the night. And they really, they really got a lot of what they wanted. Not only did they pick the guy first overall that went to school at Arizona that is looking to be their big man corner piece of the future. A lot of people have kind of compared the future pairing, I should say, of DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker to Shaq and Kobe. And Devin Booker has drawn some Kobe Bryant comparisons early on in his career already. I do think that those are warranted for the most part. I think Devin Booker is going to be one of the best scorers, if not the best scorer in the league one day. I don't really think he has the potential to be the best player in the league, but he really is an outstanding pure scorer, somebody that did score 70 points in a basketball game. He's an incredible shooter, gets his own offense, and having somebody like DeAndre Ayton, who is one of the most athletic and dynamic pieces that you could have at that position, truly incredible. There's some defensive liabilities to be worked out there, as there are on that team in general, but really, really a nice pick. And then on top of that, they end up getting the 10th overall pick as well, Mikal Bridges, who was drafted by Philadelphia. He's a Philly native. His mom works in the 76ers front office. He went to Villanova and was under the impression that he would be going to the 76ers. Later on, gets traded to the Phoenix Suns. Zhaire Smith, I forgot how to pronounce his name, he will be headed to Philadelphia as they did a pick swap there with the 10th and 16th overall pick. But the biggest pick swap of the night was between the 3rd and the 5th. And I believe, Dallas is further compensated by that by getting a first-round pick next year as well. But Trae Young was picked 5th overall, but he will be headed to Atlanta, whereas Luka Doncic, who was picked 3rd overall, will be headed off to Dallas. Actually, it's Atlanta that will be getting that pick. So really interesting trade right there. Luka Doncic, who is, arguably one of the highest regarded and recruited foreign players to ever enter the NBA. Certainly one that many thought could be the first overall pick. Many people consider him to be the premier player in the draft, and he gets a year to learn from Dirk Nowitzki in Dallas. And I think that that's a really good setup that Dallas has going, building a backcourt of Dennis Smith Jr. and Luka Doncic. That's exciting for the future. And I really like the pick for Atlanta, too. They finally get a bona fide shooter on that team, somebody that they did not have last year, especially with the injuries that they've been dealt, and adding him to the mix with Kent Bazemore, who's a really solid defender, and Dennis Schroeder. If that team gets healthy, they could be right back in the mix for a playoff spot as soon as next year. So really good moves there. Sacramento picking up Marvin Bagley at the 2nd overall pick. I definitely like that, assuming that they hang on to everybody. They're starting to build a really nice core of talent. Memphis Grizzlies picking Jaren Jackson Jr., who Jaren Jackson Jr. himself was pretty skeptical about going into that organization, but was eased about that. I think that's a great pick for Memphis as well, especially if we're able to get Mike Conley healthy and Marcus Selvak. That team can be people forget that despite how disastrous last season was for Memphis and Mike Conley being all year, they did start the year 5-2. They did beat the Golden State Warriors in the first week. And I think when you have Mike Conley and Marc Gasol on the floor at the same time, that's a good basketball team. I don't think many people would argue with that. I think Mike Conley is one of the most criminally underrated players, not just in the NBA right now, but of this generation, of the past decade. I can't think of too many people that have been overlooked as much as Mike Conley has. Somebody that can get his own offense, is an incredible passer. It can very low-key break your ankles as well. Really an incredible player. And Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to be in a good environment to learn that from. The only question mark there is how well can J.B. Bickerstaff incorporate him into that system that is expected to get Mike Conley back, who is still on that monster deal. Mohamed Bamba getting picked for Orlando. The Chicago Bulls are the really solid pick, getting Wendell Carter. I really like that, mixing that in with Lauri Markkanen and Chris Dunn. That's a really, really good talent core. Cleveland ended up picking Colin Sexton with the 8th overall pick. Don't know if that's going to be enough to maintain LeBron James. A big story of the night, especially throughout the lottery, and as you could tell by my sweatshirt, certainly within my circle, was the fall of Michael Porter Jr. in this draft. And heading into last college season, he was thought by many to be the best player in this draft class. He still may very well be, certainly may be the most talented player in this draft class. But of course, with those back issues and only playing 3 games at college, a lot of warranted question marks. And I think it's very understandable that in a class that is this stacked with talent. I mean, you look at that top 10, there's a lot of players there that I expect to be all-stars one day. It's not just Ayton, Bagley, and Doncic, but very high expectations for Trae Young, who's been playing with the Stephen Curry comparisons in college. Mohamed Bamba looks to be one of the best big men in the league one day. Colin Sexton, really haven't seen too many one guards that are that athletic and skilled in a while, and arguably the best college player in Alabama school history. Or at least, within this millennium, going back to Mo Williams really being the last guy who at least has found significant NBA success. Kevin Knox had very high expectations coming in to this season. He was picked 9th overall by the Knicks. But I really, really, really love the pick by the Denver Nuggets in selecting Michael Porter Jr. I think at 14th overall, it's not as much of a risk as if a team in the top 10 picked him. And if you look at the needs that team has, the small forward position is really the only one that they don't have figured out long-term, or at least semi-long-term. I love the backcourt that the Denver Nuggets offer in Jamal Murray and Gary Harris, 2 guys that can shoot the lights out, are both very athletic, can both get their own offense. And then you look at Nikola Jokic, arguably the best big man passer in the NBA. Paul Millsap, who missed most of last year, you would have to think that Denver, if his back problems don't persist into his NBA career, he could really, really be a true star in this league. I do believe that. I certainly have question marks about, the mental strength of him. He hasn't really been tested on that high of a level yet. Of course, he did come back and play the SEC championship game and the tournament game, but looked to only be at around 50%, was noticeably not the athletic player that you see on film in high school. So it'll really be interesting, but I think that you couldn't find a better fit for a player like him. So I definitely commend the Denver Nuggets for making that pick. I don't even really think it's that much of a risk when it's 14th overall. When you look at the system you have, you're putting him in where Wilson Chandler was playing. I really like that selection. So that's certainly something to look at. Other big news from the night is that the Philadelphia 76ers really didn't do a whole lot to improve their chances of getting LeBron James. Many people believe that to be a long shot going in, but certainly one of the more attractive destinations for him. What many thought was that the Sixers would pick an international player so they could stash their pick. They ended up picking Landry Shamet out of Wichita State. So it doesn't really look like that's going to be the case. He's going to look to be the backup for Ben Simmons. They still will probably not re-sign J.J. Redick, I would have to think. But the Philadelphia 76ers, who had the 10th overall pick, I didn't really like the trade that much between them and Phoenix. I think hanging on to Mikal Bridges probably would have been the better move. And to me, after last night, I don't really see a scenario in where Philly lands LeBron James. And there's certainly implications for LeBron that happened last night. I don't really think Cleveland greatly improved their chances either, although to be fair to the Cavs, I don't really think there's a pick they could have made that would have significantly improved their chances of retaining LeBron James. So I'm still very curious to see where he may go. And I think a lot of that depends on the other movement across the league. And because Kawhi Leonard did not move last night, which I don't think was expected, but because, now that we've gone through last night and see that he has not gone anywhere, and that the Spurs have made a statement that they're going to do everything they can to maintain their star player, which I would certainly believe that they will do and make the best effort in. This is not a situation that is typical of the San Antonio Spurs. And I'm not saying that I expect Kawhi Leonard to stay there, because if a player wants out and gets a compelling trade offer, that's another story. And, if the Spurs get an offer that they really want, that's something that they can do. But teams have question marks about his health. Like I said earlier, I think the Boston Celtics or the Philadelphia 76ers have the best packages that they could put together to attract Kawhi Leonard. I would not be surprised if that becomes the primary goal of the Philadelphia 76ers now that the events of last night made it look like LeBron James really isn't in the realm of possibility anymore, that they may try and trade the picks that they got last night. Trade those players, I should say, and maybe package in a few other players to try and lure Kawhi Leonard to Philadelphia, because if you're able to maintain that core, that's something that is really, really scary if he's healthy. And then, of course, for the Celtics, they have a multitude of packages that they could put together, but I just really don't see Danny Ainge being willing to give up a guy like Jaylen Brown or especially Jason Tatum in a trade. I think that he's really going to do his best to hang on to those guys. Boston is also stacked at that position, so you would have to think that if a trade were to be made, that one of Gordon Hayward, Jaylen Brown, or Jason Tatum would be on the move. And I don't really know if that's in the cards. Trading Terry Rozier is one thing, but then you have to remember that Kyrie Irving's a free agent after next year, and he's somebody that has already expressed interest in the New York Knicks, and that's kind of what I'm expecting heading in to the 2019-20 season. So those are all things to take a look at. But I do really love, especially as a Celtics fan, I love the pick that they made at 27th overall, picking up Robert Williams III from Texas A&M. Really gives them an authentic shot blocker and lob threat, something that they didn't really have a whole lot of last year. And especially with Aaron Baines being an unrestricted free agent, you bring him in on the bench, gets torn around a guy like Al Horford. Really outstanding pick for them. I like the Utah Jazz pick of getting Grayson Allen as well. I think he's somebody that obviously, with the amount of experience that he has in college, I think he can really fit well into that system. And I've talked about in my videos so much before about how Quinn Snyder gets the most out of his players on both ends of the floor. And I think when he gets inserted into a group of guys that really have a chip on their shoulder, especially like Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, who, have kind of played with the odds against them. Gobert since he's been in the NBA, and obviously Donovan Mitchell last year coming in as a pick that wasn't really expected to do a whole lot and ends up being, in my mind, the rookie of the year. So that will be really interesting in Utah, and I think that just adds to the complexity of the Western Conference. But it's really hard to make a judgment on how these things are going to turn out when, we're not into free agency yet. We don't know what the fate of Kawhi Leonard or Paul George or especially LeBron James is going to be. And I don't think that there is a perfect situation for LeBron James. I don't think that there's an ideal place that he can go and be there to beat the Golden State Warriors. But I also don't think that LeBron James needs to chase a championship. I think that he's already clearly in the conversation as the greatest player of all time, as is. I know I've expressed my opinion that I believe he is the greatest player of all time. And he, with 3 championships, I don't think he needs to win anymore, especially when you've been to 9 finals. So I think that LeBron James, in his decision, will be contingent on what the best fit is going to be. And I think that the Golden State Warriors will still be the best team in basketball next year, barring injuries. But it's going to be a lot closer, and I think that will certainly be impacted on where LeBron James goes, as long as that isn't staying in Cleveland. And Cleveland also expressed their desire to hold on to Kevin Love regardless. And if Kevin Love ends up finding a compelling offer somewhere else, that could really put Cleveland right back in the lottery. So last night's draft, as much as a lot of interesting things happened, there weren't any major trades. Of course, the one trade that did include NBA players that happened, Dwight Howard being traded to the Brooklyn Nets, and then that's already looking to buy out Dwight Howard. So who knows where he will end up. And he's faced a lot of criticism within the past few years, despite still stuffing the stat sheet and finding ways to, really put up big numbers, that he hasn't really had a big impact on winning since his days in Orlando. And I certainly think there's some merit to that argument. I don't really think he's been put in a system that utilizes him the best, but I also think a big part of it is that the NBA has certainly evolved a lot since Dwight Howard was an MVP candidate, and that type of player just isn't what is needed by most teams, especially with more and more teams having 5 shooters on the floor at all times. Finding a real role for Dwight Howard in the rotation starts to get a bit more difficult than it ideally would have been. So that's kind of where we're at right now for the NBA draft. Definitely an interesting night, a lot of fun to watch. But I'm really interested to see what's going to happen in the next week and a half or so, especially going into free agency. And I think that's when we'll have a much better idea of what this NBA season is going to look like. But until then, that's kind of all I have. I should have an album review up probably at some point tomorrow. I work in the afternoon, so I may have an album review in the morning. I'm trying to make that more and more of a regular thing. If you're tuning into those, thank you. Hopefully you enjoy them, me pretending that I know what I'm talking about music, and I guess about sports as well. But that's all I have for you today. Peter Marzano. Have a good night.